Frank Reich was the first quarterback in the Carolina Panthers teams in 1995 when they were the expansion Carolina Panthers. And their first year, Frank Reich is now the head coach. It's all come first full circle, and fans are kind of mixed on this. My first reaction is, eh, I don't love Frank Reich. I think he's a fine coach. I think he's a good guy. I don't think he's a great rebuild coach because he showed he couldn't do it with Indianapolis. I feel like he's a really good play caller, good dude, offensive coordinator, but I don't think he's someone who can inspire a team to run through a wall. Same way Steve Wilkes did. And I feel like Steve Wilkes has a right to feel slighted in this whole process where wasn't even given a shot to interview to be the head coach of this team. So I'm not usually someone to push this, but like you want to talk about diversity with NFL head coaches, talk about a guy who took your team from losing Christian McCaffrey, trading away your best assets. You get rid of Baker Mayfield, and then he makes Sam Darnold look competent, makes you have a run game with Chuba Hubbard. Your defense was playing elite. He was making burns, and he was elevating the play of the Carolina Panthers. And he really built some momentum going into next year, where if we have a good draft, get some free agents, have some pieces on a quarterback where it's like, wow, I feel like Steve Wilkes really has the finger on the pulse of his team. And you know what this reminded me of? When Richie Bisaccia had the Raiders gut firing at the end of the year. Obviously, the Raiders have Derek Carr, who's a much better quarterback than Sam Darnold. But then you bring in some offensive coordinator jabroni who doesn't have great social skills and who's not a good motivator. It's like the exact same situation. So it's like, you want to talk about a lack of diversity with head coaches? Like, how about we stick with the guy who had your team riding high and had your team with momentum going into the playoffs with Sam freaking Darnold, who's the guy who was seeing ghosts, and you made him look like a legitimate quarterback where people were believing in him not to fuck up games.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if I remember, Steve Wilkes, I know he coached the Cardinals for 1 year.
Yeah, he did.
But that was the Josh Rosen era. Because they coached, he was 2019.
That was Vance Joseph.
Was it Vance Joseph?
Yeah.
I know Steve Wilkes had 1 year in Arizona.
Okay.
So he didn't really get a fair shake there either because that roster was god awful. They were entering a rebuild. And it was kind of Texan-esque where they only gave him a year to really test the waters and they didn't perform.
Yeah.
But he proved in Carolina that he can motivate a team. And so I agree with the Steve Wilkes thing. As far as Frank Reich, I want to see him with a new opportunity. This is his second chance. And I think in Carolina, there's an opportunity for a full rebuild. He gets to pick the quarterback because in Indianapolis, it was Chris Ballard. He was the one going after Phillip Rivers. He was the one going after Jacoby Brissett and Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz and all these guys.
Frank Reich gave the okay on Carson.
He did give the okay on Carson, and Carson brought them almost to the playoffs, minus the Jags game.
That was probably the most competent they looked, at least.
Well, at least then they had, Jonathan Taylor was the leading rusher.
Mm-hmm.
They had Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz played pretty well that year. So I think that was the guy he okayed, and I feel like that was the Colts team with the most potential. Had they had beaten the Jags, they would have been 10-7, and they would have been in the playoffs.
Yeah.
We all know how that ended. That was a disaster. Part of that was Carson Wentz. Part of that was Frank Reich.
And the curse.
But at the same time, now they have the 7th pick, I believe, or 7th or 8th pick this year. Now he gets to pick his quarterback, who he wants, develop him. Maybe he drafts maybe someone like an Anthony Richardson. He can sit behind Sam Darnold, sit behind some other, bridge quarterback.
Yeah.
And then do a proper rebuild. They already have players on defense that are solid.
Yeah.
Their running backs, Chuba Hubbard has proven to be a pretty solid running back. I'm not in love with him, but maybe as a 2 running back, he's pretty okay. They have some fine weapons. They can definitely improve upon it, but they have the team around him, and I feel like I'm going to give him a chance to see how he can develop the quarterback because he's a quarterback, and I'd like to think that he can develop a quarterback as well.
Yeah, definitely. And then you could even fix this team pretty quickly if you went out there and got Derek Carr and DeAndre Hopkins. And then, Chuba Hubbard isn't an emo Latina girl. He is a solid foundational piece where maybe he's like a nice blonde you meet at the club,
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Not the sexiest of hires by any means.